Hey everybody, welcome back to When Harry Met Board Games, where we feed our people with relatable content and our victory condition is your satisfaction. I'm Harry, and before we go any further, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button somewhere on the lower right hand side of your screen. That way we could all move on with our lives and enjoy the rest of this video. But today I have another top 10 list for you guys. I have my top 10 games for 6 or more players. And a couple caveats before we move any further. First of all, these are not necessarily top 10 games that play best at 6 players, even though a few of them I do think that would apply. It's just top 10 games that accommodate 6 or more players that I would choose in a setting where I have 6 or more people playing with me, or in particular 6 people playing with me. Now, another caveat is I have not actually played all the games on my list at a 6-player count. I have played all 10 of these games at 5 players, so that is something I factored in, and I feel that I've played them enough times at 5 players to have a really good idea of what they would feel like at 6. Now, more than half of these games I have played at 6 players, but some of them, again, I've only played at 5, and again, based on my experiences and the rules, I have a pretty good gist of what a 6-player experience would feel like. And finally, the last caveat is that I've ranked my games by a combination of how much I enjoy the game and how well the game plays at 6 players. So if I really like the game, I might overlook a little bit some of its shortcomings at the higher player count, but I'm not going to ignore all of it. If it's a subpar experience at 6 players, it probably will be lower down my list. So again, those are the two things being factored in: how much I just like the game, period, the gaming system, and how well it plays or it's implemented at the 6-player count. Without any further ado, we're now going to go into the top 10. First, let's start with my number 10 game. My number 10 board game for 6 players is Bang the Dice Game. This is a Wild West themed, quick filler, almost party game, social deduction, where each player takes a different role. One player is a sheriff, at least one player is a deputy, at least one player is a renegade, and at least 2 or maybe more players are the outlaws, and they each have different victory conditions. The outlaws are trying to kill the sheriff. The renegade is trying to survive last with the sheriff and then kill him. The deputy is trying to protect the sheriff, and the sheriff is just trying to figure out who's his deputy and do away with all the bad guys. But again, everybody has their secret role. Nobody knows who they are. We're rolling dice to carry out the different actions, whether it be, shooting the people next to you or a couple spaces away, or drinking some beer to heal. I guess that works in the Wild West. Rolling some dynamite, which can be disastrous if you roll too much of it. And rolling some dice that trigger the coming of the Native Americans, and that can end up having problems in this game here. This is such a cool, fun game. I think 6 players is probably the minimum player count where this game starts to feel really cool. You can play this with 4 and 5 players, but it says here actually you could actually even play it with 3 players. Never done that. But 4 or 5 players, while it's fun and playable, it almost feels like an activity to some extent, like, hey, let's kill some time. Once you start playing with 6 players or more, this game feels like a legitimate experience. And again, it's still a rather quick game, plays in about 15 to 20 minutes. Fun Wild West themed game, Bang the Dice Game, my number 10 6-player board game. Now we move on to my number 9 6-player board game, and that is Citadels, designed by Bruno Faidutti, and this is the Ultimate Edition, or the Deluxe Edition here, because it includes 2 other expansions here, which adds more characters. This is a character selection game where you're building a city. You're playing, you're gaining some coins, paying those coins to build different cities that are worth different amount of coins, and ultimately you're trying to have the most valuable city. But the bread and butter of the game is the beginning of the round, where players are secretly selecting one of the roles, one of 8 roles, and handing the cards clockwise to all the other players, and they each select the different characters. And some of these characters help you in different ways. Others can hurt players if you know what character they've selected. If they become predictable, you can use your special attacking power to hurt them in one fashion or another. So you don't want to be too predictable in this game. It is such a cool game, and the reason why I think 6 players, I've never played this at 6 players, I don't think so. I've definitely played it several times at 5. Not too sure if I played it at 6. But the reason why is because the more players, the more of the actual roles are going to come out into the game. I think this has a variant for when you play with 2 players or even 3, where players can have multiple characters. However, once you play at the 4 or 5 player range, each player can only get 1 character, and not every character is going to be in the game, and so on and so forth. But with 6 players, you're going to have a wide range of different characters that are being picked because of all the players that are in the game, and it doesn't add too much to the game length because, yes, once you get to the 7th, or I think this game even accommodates up to 8 players, yes, that's going to drag the game on. It's going to feel too long. I think 5 players felt pretty good, felt just right. I think 6 players would still feel pretty much in that range of just right as far as game length. You could make some modifications and decrease the end game trigger, which is building 7 cities or 8 cities. You could probably lower it to 6 cities as the threshold to trigger the end game. Whatever you have to do to make things work for you. But again, the fact that each player is going to be able to choose their own different character, and that you're going to have to think twice about which character you pick, and also as you anticipate and guess what characters other players picked, you have more to factor in and more to think about because more players in the game. So again, I think this would be an excellent 6-player board game. My number 9, Citadels. And now we move on to my number 8. And this is a game I've definitely played with 6 players and even much more. And that is Deception Murder in Hong Kong. This is an amazing mystery, murder mystery, social deduction type of game. This is Clue for gamers. You're trying to figure out who done it, who did it, and you're trying to figure out what weapons was used. You're not necessarily caring what room it was, even though there are some clues that are given throughout the game that make reference to different rooms, right? So there is a little bit of that. But it is such a cool game because each player has a different role. One player is obviously the murderer who's choosing their weapon and their special item that is associated with the crime scene. The other players, most of the other players are just investigators trying to piece together the clues and figure out who the murderer is, but they also have to figure out what weapon and what items were used, or else the murderer will get away because of lack of evidence. And finally, you got the forensic scientist, and the forensic scientist is silently giving clues by placing these little bullet-shaped pieces onto different spots and different clue tiles that communicate the clues that they want to give to their teammates, the other investigators, without speaking verbally, without betraying facts through body language, and so on and so forth. Just a methodical process of choosing which clues to give and also which order in which to assign them. Really cool game. One of those social deduction games where you don't really care what role you have, because quite often in social deduction games, you want to be the bad guy, or heck, you even want to just be the good guy because you're afraid of being the bad guy and getting caught. It is very easy for the bad guy to get away in this game. So you do not have to even worry about that. You do not have to be great at bluffing. Even if your body language is terrible and people figure out that you're the murderer, they're still going to have to figure out your weapon and your item, or else you get away. So even if you could just be creative and think of ways to blend in or to throw people off with your selection of weapons and special crime-related items, you'll be able to go sneak underneath the cracks and nobody will notice, or at least completely solve the case. Really cool. It adds additional characters for higher player counts. 6 players, I think, is the minimum player count, where, again, one of these games where if you play with less than 6, you can. I think you could play with 4 or less. It's just not the same. Once you start getting to the 6 number count, player count, and higher, that's when this game starts picking up in interest. And again, it accommodates up to 12, so you probably do want to get closer to that higher threshold of the player count. But it's still an excellent game at 6. My number 8, 6-player board game of all time, Deception Murder in Hong Kong. Now we move on to my number 7, and that is this one right here, King of Tokyo. And this game plays from 2 to 6. I've played 2 players. It's cool. It's kind of fun. But when you play 2 players, you're really just playing just to kill some time. It really is. You need at least 3 players to make this game feel competitive, slightly interesting. And you really need, I'm going to say at least 4 for it to really start to shine. But at 6, it really shines, and it accommodates the higher player count by adding an additional space to the board, because there's only 1 space on the board. It's Tokyo, and players are vying and fighting and wrestling to try to take over Tokyo, because that's how they get more victory points. But at a 5 or 6 player count, it would just be too tight with just 1 spot. So they add an additional spot called Tokyo Bay. So you have 2 spots to fight and contend over, and you have 4 or 5 other opponents to worry about as you do this. Really cool, really fun game. Richard Garfield designed this. He took this Yahtzee mechanism to another level, incorporated some card play, which we all know Richard Garfield is known for. Games like Android Netrunner, Magic the Gathering, even his implementation of cards or upgrade cards in his classic game Robo Rally, which this actually kind of reminds me of. So you're working for currency to buy these cards that basically give you temporary or long-term upgrades to your special character. You can win this game by scoring the most points or scoring it to a threshold. I think it's 20 points. Or you could also win just by being a brutal, vicious, savage of a human being and annihilating all your other opponents and attacking them until they don't have any more health left. Which again, in a 6-player game, that can become very, very tricky. There is player elimination. With higher player counts, people might have to sit out longer if they do get eliminated. But I still think that it's a relatively quick game, even at its higher player counts. My number 7 6-player board game of all time, King of Tokyo. Now we move on to my number 6. And this is Dice Town. And I'm not too sure. I don't think I've played Dice Town at 6 players. I've definitely played several times at 5. I might have played once at 6 players. Don't quote me. But here's the thing. I love this game. And this game, it was a challenge to rank it higher, because here's the thing. To play 6 players, you need to play with the Wild West expansion, because the Wild West expansion is not only the one that adds the dice and the cups for that 6th player, but the Wild West expansion adds the different spots for all the different locations in town, so that the first and second person ranked in each of those areas, because you're rolling for different poker hands, and each of the poker hands benefits you in different ways throughout the town, from left to right on the board in the different locations of the town. But in a 5-player game, you only have about 5 locations, and it's very possible for 1 or 2 players to win multiple locations. And quite frankly, you'll have 1 or 2 players, maybe even 3 if you're playing a 6-player game, end up not winning any of the locations. And yes, the base game has a consolation prize, Dr. Bad Luck, who gives you a little slight benefit. That's not too bad, but again, if that happens to you too many times throughout the course of the game, it could get very frustrating. At the end of the day, it's still a dice rolling game. There's lots of ways of mitigating, but to some extent, you still can be a victim of chance and a victim of the circumstances. However, again, the Wild West expansion adds a secondary benefit to each of the locations. So even if you're just second place in some of those spots, you will capitalize and get something for it that's better than whatever Doc Bad Luck has to offer you. The problem with all of these locations is that they do add a little bit to the game. And sometimes that's the problem with a 6-player game that wasn't originally designed as a 6-player game. In this case, while Dice Town was originally designed for 2 to 5 players. However, if you don't mind the extra time, which is it's not too bad compared to some other games. If you don't mind a little bit of extra time and you want to get the 6 players and again feel that competitiveness because you got 6 different players vying and fighting for control of all these different areas, I think this game works excellently at 6 players, and that is my number 6 6-player board game of all time, Dice Town. And now we move on to the top 5, the cream of the crop. Let's go on to my number 5 board game at 6 players, and that is Memoir 44. And this is a classic World War II game from the Command and Color lines of games designed by Richard Borg. This one here is published by Days of Wonder, has tons of expansion content. Now, this is typically a 2-player game. Theoretically, you can play 3 versus 3 just with the base game, because the way that the battlefield map works is the battlefield is divided into 3. Your left flank, your right flank, and your center board. And if you're playing 3 against 3, that would be a 6-player game, each of the 3 players can take one of the corresponding divisions of the battlefield. And that would work just fine. However, the way I think this game thrives at those higher player counts is when you play it Overlord. And Overlord, to play Overlord, first of all, you're going to need a second box of Memoir 44. So you can make these huge, gigantic maps. You put the 2 maps together, and instead of having, 6 divisions, technically you have, or 3 divisions, technically you have 6 For thematic or gameplay purposes, they still count as 3 different sections. So the 2 leftmost are your left flank, the 2 center are your center, and the 2 rightmost are your right flank. But that way, you can still divide the game into 3 players. You could play even higher if you want. You could accommodate 4 against 4. You could have 3 versus 3. And now you will be able, each individual player will control more troops because they'll have a bigger size of a board to control. And that can be really, really fun. Of course, you're going to have to choose one player to be your commander or your overlord and to make the bulk of the decisions as far as card play is concerned, because this game not only has movement and dice rolling for attack, it also has card play, which grants you access to special abilities, special orders that you could give your different units. It grants you access to which sides of the board you can even tap into or you can even activate. Really cool, really methodical. But again, it allows for that, in group play, it allows for the opportunity for you as a general to delegate. You have an idea of what direction you want to go as far as your strategy is concerned, but you got to trust your generals underneath you to make the right decisions, to see something that you're seeing, or even maybe see something you're not seeing and make an even better decision perhaps than the one you had in mind. But again, it just adds to the reality of feeling like you're a general or a commander in a real battle, in a real war. Great historical, notes for each of the different scenarios, each of the different battles. These are all based on historical battles. Fun game, beautiful game. And again, at 6 players, I haven't played this game too many times. I think I've played twice at that player count, but both times were really, really fun. And it's something I hope to do again sometime in the future. My number 5, 6-player board game of all time, Memoir 44. And now we move on to my number 4. And this is a game that I love and adore. And again, it's one of those cases where my feeling as to how well it plays at 6 players keeps it from going higher, even though my love for the game would probably have it ranked higher. My number 4, 6-player board game of all time, 7 Wonders. Anybody who watches this channel should know that I love this game. I know this game is a little older. I know this game for some people feels perhaps too easy or too basic, maybe too pasted on thematically. I don't know what the excuses are, but I love this game, and I'm not even too good at it. I won the other day for the first time in probably like a year, and that was refreshing, but I love this game. And this game, the title says it all, can play up to 7 players. With the Cities expansion, you can actually play it with 8 players, even though the rules recommend that an 8-player game be team games of, I guess, 2 versus 2 versus 2 versus 2, 4 different teams of 2. However, I do appreciate this game and its high player counts. I've never played a 6-player count that I could think of. I've played countless 5-player games. From my experience, I believe that the 6-player game would be cool and it would be good. However, I do feel that it would be a drop down from the 5-player game, which is why this is not ranked higher. Because if I was ranking this based on 5 players, this might go up as high as number 2, definitely number 3, but it's only number 4 because I do feel that at the lower player counts, one of the benefits you get is the benefit of information. You get a hand of cards, you're going to get a couple hand of cards, and those first couple hand of cards, you're going to see them again. When you play at 6 and then finally at 7 players, you're reducing the amount of cards you'll see again, or the amount of cards in the deck that you'll see again. Now, again, if you add the Cities expansion, the Cities expansion adds 1 more card to every player's starting hand, which is helpful, which increases the likelihood of cards coming around and making it to you. But at a 6-player count, without any expansions, you will not get your starting card back. And that could be, a little frustrating because basically you're kind of just hoping for something good to fall your way. But there is a little bit of decision making when you get that first hand and you choose 2 cards and you're choosing one and hoping that the other one of those may come back to you or not. Again, it's just a little bit exciting. Also, I feel that at 5 players, this is a table hog. It takes up lots of space, but also it's a brain hog because you are looking at all your other players' opponents' tableaus and you are factoring things in. While yes, your immediate neighbors are the only ones that could directly impact your play and they're the only ones who you could directly impact, it doesn't mean you don't want to pay attention to what other things might be going on in the game. So I feel like it's hard to navigate. It's hard to feel like you have a sense of control at the higher player counts. So I do feel like a 6-player game is not quite as fun as a 5-player game. But again, it's still good enough to make my number 4 board game of all time 7, or 6-player board game of all time 7 Wonders. Now we move on to my number 3, and that is Sheriff of Nottingham. I love this game. Now, to play the Sheriff of Nottingham, you need the Merry Men expansion. And what's interesting about this is that instead of having one sheriff, you have 2 deputies. And the 2 deputies basically take the place of the sheriff. So you still have 4 merchants each round, but you have 2 deputies. And basically you have to get past both of them because they can both agree to search you. They could both agree to let you pass. Or one of them could say, I want to search you, and the other one will say not. So your chances of getting searched and investigated increase drastically when you got 2 deputies instead of just 1 sheriff to try to bamboozle and get past. Also, from reading the rule book, it seems to me, and I'm saying this because, again, I've never played the 6-player. I played the 5-player several times. But from the 6-player version, it seems that you don't draw from the discard piles. You're only drawing from the draw deck, it sounds like. So it means you're kind of relegated to some chance. And again, you have less control, perhaps, of what cards you're drafting. And again, it just makes it harder to have the type of hand that you want if you want to be honest. So again, I just feel like this puts all the pressure on the merchants. Some of the modules in the Merry Men expansion actually liberate the merchant and puts the pressure on the sheriff because, you know, contraband and illegal goods all of a sudden are more incentivized, and now the sheriff really has to think twice about who may or may not be cheating them. But the burden, the weight with the 6-player module of the 2 deputies puts the weight on the merchants. Can they really get past? Is it really worth risking trying to sneak in that contraband or that chicken that I'm lying and mixing in with my apples if I know that there's twice as much of a chance of someone checking me out? That, again, sounds very intriguing. It sounds like the game length is pretty much the same as a typical 5-player game. This game is a blast, and the idea of having more personalities involved, because this game is really about lots of laugh out loud moments with some pretty neat set collection as far as the gameplay is concerned. My number 3 6-player board game of all time, Sheriff of Nottingham. And now my number 2 is Shadows over Camelot. This is an amazing King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table themed cooperative board game where players are all going on different quests, trying to retrieve, you know, the Holy Grail, trying to retrieve Sir Lancelot's armor, trying to retrieve the Excalibur sword, which all give you different benefits, but ultimately trying to just succeed, fight back, you know, hold back the war between the Picts and the Sacs, and just a bunch of different other quests that you're trying to accomplish to fill the round table with successful white swords as opposed to failure of black swords. But there is a likelihood, the great likelihood, that one of your teammates is a traitor, and he or she may be playing all game, making decisions to hurt or hold back the team. And because this game limits verbal communication as to the cards, because mainly the gameplay is card play, you're playing different sets of cards, you know, multiples, pairs, full houses, you're kind of playing poker, but you're limited in the communication. And the people that I play with, we follow and respect those rules because we feel like it adds to the challenge of the game, and obviously means that we win less often than we would like to. We actually just won this game for the first time about a week ago, and what's funny is we won because there was no traitor. We thought there was one, and we were accusing each other all game long, but ultimately at the end, there was no traitor, and we finally won our first game. That's what we needed to win this game. Beautiful pieces, beautiful board, beautiful components. Each player has their own different character with own different special abilities, which I think is neat. Now, this is, again, one of those games that I only played at 5 players. I played at 5 players a good amount of times. More often than not, we play at 4. No, actually, no. More often than not, we play at 5. However, I know that this game would be great at 6 because it doesn't necessarily add to the game length. Neither does a 7th player. Yes, you might, as an individual, wait longer to get to your turn, but it's a cooperative game where you're communicating and talking and discussing things throughout the game, so you still feel involved in your teammates' games. And again, this game is one of those co-op games that the higher player counts favor the players because, first of all, the ratio between traitor to loyal player increases because there's only one trader in the base game at least. So the more players you have, the more loyal players you'll have. And also, there are so many quests and they could become quite overwhelming at the lower player counts because it's hard to tackle all of these tasks with just 3, 4, or 5 players. Once you get to 6 or 7 players, you could divide yourselves and distribute your forces and your efforts throughout the board and be more successful at these quests. That is why I think this game will be an excellent 6-player game. Shadows over Camelot, my number 2 6-player board game. And now finally, my number 1, the cream of the crop. And I have absolutely played this game at 6 players. And I'm going to say that I think 6 players is the best player count for that game. And this is Cosmic Encounter. Amazing science fiction themed game where players each have a different particular alien race. The game comes with dozens upon dozens of races. Expansions add even more. Each player controls their own system of planets, and they're trying to colonize other planets and other players' systems, either through warfare or through diplomacy, negotiation, and so on and so forth. Each player's alien race gives them one little or maybe even 2 little ways of breaking the general rules of the game, which make them powerful and unique to all the other players around the board. This game comes with a lot of variety. The intrigue, the possibility of suspense, the management of your hand of cards, which in essence are your powers and are your military force as you're attacking or negotiating with other players. This game, you can play at 3 players. I never have, I never will. At 4 players, it's an okay game. It's still pretty good. At 5 players, this game begins to shine. But at 6 players, this game is amazing. And even though I haven't played 7 or 8 players, which I know this game can accommodate that many players with further expansions, I am pretty sure I will not like it. Because here's the thing about playing with 6 players. With 6 players, there's already a chance that you may not get a turn. Theoretically, that could happen at 5 players, maybe even at 4 players, but it's very unlikely. At 6 players, the likelihood of you being, let's say, the 5th or 6th player on the turn order and not getting a turn is possible. However, this game does mitigate that because every player is involved in every other player's turn, so it's okay. It's not that big of a deal. But I imagine that at 7 or 8 players, your chances of not getting a turn increase drastically, and it's just not that much. 6 players is perfect. There's enough balance in the game. You can form alliances of 3 versus 3, or a couple of alliances of 2 versus 2 versus 2, maybe even an alliance of 4 versus 2 or 5 versus 1. So many different possibilities to balance and navigate the political games that are taking place in the universe or in the galaxy. That is pretty much it. My number 1 6-player board game of all time, Cosmic Encounter. And that's it, folks. These are my top 10 games at 6 players. I love these games. Some of these games I love more than others, but they all play well, accommodate 6 players, and play well at those player counts. Thank you so much for joining us here, guys. Please don't forget to hit the subscribe button, like button, comment down below. What's your favorite game to play at 6 players? Have any of these fallen in your top 10? Let me know what your favorite games are to play at 6 players, which of my games or my picks you disagree with from your personal experience. I'm interested in hearing or reading what you have to say. Thank you so much for joining us here at When Harry Met Board Games. Again, I'm Harry saying take care, everybody. Stay safe, stay healthy, and have fun gaming. Bye-bye.